Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Summer Sippin. I'm going to let everyone come on in and join. I'm going to start opening my wine, and you should as well. Today, we are drinking the William Chris Vineyards, of course, Sangiovese from Alta Loma Vineyards, and this is the 2018 vintage. So, as you're joining, let me know. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is the 8th episode that we've done together. So welcome back, everybody. As y'all know, I am calling from California today. I'm in the Russian River Valley. Well, technically, I'm in Santa Rosa. This is the Airbnb that I'm staying at with my mom and sister, who are actually live with us here in the studio. They're just behind the camera, so they won't be on camera today. We've done a lot of adventuring today, and we're all exhausted, but not too exhausted to hop on and do a Summer Sippin' episode talking about Texas wine from California. So I'm in California. Tell me where y'all are calling from, and please open some wine because I think even though I've done some wine tasting today, I do need an actual relaxing glass of wine instead of the intense tasting that I've been doing so far. Open some wine. Okay, Sangiovese from Alta Loma. Tell me if you have it, if you're drinking something else. Hi, Sherry. Hi, Michelle and Ray. Kelly calling from Buddha. Yeah, Sherry, I've had so much Russian River Valley wine. Today we went up to Healdsburg and tasted some Alexander Valley wine as well. And then we hit up Green Valley and Russian River as well, which is on the west side, a little bit of a cooler area. Tell me if you've been to the Russian River Valley before. Tell me if you're a California wine fan. We are going to talk about both Texas and California wines today. So get ready for two worlds to merge together. All right. I see some comments coming in. It looks like everyone's a little slow to join today, just like me. So as you're joining, open your wine. We're getting started on the wine right away, and tell me where you're calling from. If you're calling from California, if I gave you a bottle of wine and asked you to join after my tasting in Russian River Valley, tell me what winery you're calling from, and thank you so much for joining. For those of you who have not done a Summer Sippin' episode before, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do every week. This was born out of our winemakers tastings with William Chris Vineyards, which is in the heart of the Texas Hill Country in High Texas. During the COVID-19 shutdown, we started doing winemaker tastings, and this is where our wine grower and his wife, Chris Brundrett and Catherine, they started doing some virtual sessions where they would ship some wine all across the U.S. and hop on and talk about what Texas means to us, what growing grapes in Texas, what winemaking is like in Texas, and just share our passion for the Lone Star State and the wines that go in it. The winemakers are very busy right now because our winemakers don't just make the wine, they grow the grapes. So we do partner with some family-owned vineyard properties. We grow 60% of our grapes ourselves, but regardless of whether we are farming the grapes or not, our wine growers, Bill and Chris, are both out in the vineyard right now, harvesting grapes, touching every grape that they can, and making sure that they are growing excellent in the vineyard, so that when they're brought back to the winery in High Texas, we don't actually have to do that much to make them taste delicious. And this is the ultimate, what we think, terroir expression, and that's the sense of place, which is ultimately Texas. All we have to do is try not to take anything away from the grapes when they come to us, and that is that minimal intervention technique. So that's just a little bit about William Chris and why we're here. Today's topic is how wine regions get to be well known. I don't have a concise, pretty name for this topic. It's basically how a wine region becomes known for making excellent wine. If I say California, you think wine in the top 5 things that come to your mind. If I say France, wine is in the top 5. But why? And we're going to talk about how wine regions get to be world-renowned and what makes them wine-growing regions. So we're also going to talk about where Texas is in that journey. So what will ultimately define Texas and make it known around the world. Before we start in on that discussion, I do want to taste the wine, but I also want to hear what your thoughts are on this. Where do you think Texas is in its wine journey? And why ultimately are you drinking wine from William Chris Vineyards? And I think it probably has something to do with our 100% Texas grape motto. So I'm going to read some comments just to see if y'all have any questions already and see where y'all are calling from. Catherine just came back from California and is back in San Antonio, which is where I will be later this week. People getting the Sangiovese open. That's awesome. Hi, Dottie. Hi, Melanie. It's nice to see y'all again. Oh, Melly and Sherry, you're watching from Lago Vista. That's awesome. Alan, hi from Sugarland. Oh, you lived in California for 5 years. That's awesome. So you probably know a little bit about both of the topics that we're going to talk about today, which is awesome. Hi, Tracy. I am enjoying California, but who wouldn't? Great. I see some people have been to Russian River Valley, which is awesome. This is actually my first trip to Russian River Valley, which is crazy to think about. I kind of did everything backwards, where I studied wine from books before I got into the actual wine tasting. I had this crazy idea that I wanted to know everything about the regions that I was going to visit, so that when I went to the regions, I would know what I was supposed to look for in the glass and then be pleasantly surprised by anything that's new. So my wine smells a little bit funky. I smell a little bit of woodiness on top. I'm going to pour this lightly into a glass and just give it a sniff to make sure that it is not faulty. Look at how light that color is. So we're drinking young wines. This is a 2018. So this is about 3 years old now. Sangiovese is the grape in here that hails from Italy originally, but is growing all over the world now. California is making some fantastic Sangioveses in one particular corner. So Sangiovese likes a warm Mediterranean climate. So where it's growing in Texas is up in the Texas High Plains, which is less Mediterranean, more continental. This just means that there's not a large body of water around it, defining that region. But we know that the Texas High Plains is defined by high altitude, that raised flat plain, and we have wind blowing through. And if you've had Sangiovese before, maybe you've heard it called Chianti. That is the region that it's growing in Tuscany in Italy. So you're drinking the same grape here. And what I really want to know is how this tastes different than the Chiantis, the Tuscan Sangioveses that you've had before. And I want to know what you enjoy about them. This vineyard is Alta Loma. This is in the Texas High Plains, right near Brownfield, where La Pradera Vineyards is, and many of the vineyards that we work with. And we know that 85% of grapes in Texas are coming from that Texas High Plains, so it's no surprise that this is going to be high quality fruit in the glass. So let's give it a sniff. I still smell those really woody aromas. And I don't know about anybody else. I know that those woody aromas are covering something up because it's very, very subtle in the glass. So we swirl, and I want to see how this changes. I actually want to force it to change, and I want to cause it to change. And if you're new to Summer Sippin', you know that we do this every single week. Practice assessing the wines together so that we can really tap into the best way to treat these wines. Oh yeah, there's that fruit character. It was really hiding underneath the wood, and the woody notes have completely blown off. And honestly, when I first smelled this wine, it smelled like it might have been a faulty wood tone. And that's why we assess the wine. If you ever open a wine and smell it, and it smells funky or it smells off, put it in a glass and introduce some oxygen to it, just to make sure, because our low intervention style does cause some funky stuff to sit on top of the wine. And that is just preserving all the delicate aroma and flavor in there. It's in there. You have to cause it to come out for yourself. You have to basically tell the wine that you're ready to be drinking it. So let's put it on the palate and see what's happening. Wow. It's tart and dry. That has some really silky tannins on it, and I feel them on the sides of my tongue, and on the tip of my tongue is where I'm getting the acidity on this wine, so it's making my mouth water. I think this wine, because I'm reacting so much to the structure of this wine and less to the flavor, I want to decant this. Unfortunately, I can't decant this today because I don't have a decanter. But what I'm going to do, because I don't have a decanter, is I'm going to pour it in my glass and I'm going to continuously swirl it for about 15 minutes. And then I'm going to go back to it and assess it. And that will act like a decanter. Oh, I'm sorry. My phone is dinging at me. My apologies. I'm going to put a little bit more in here, and I'm going to give it some time to open up because I can tell that's what it needs. All right, I have a couple comments that have been coming in, so just pardon me for a second while I check. Alan, you were asking questions. Since I'm there, please. What? Didn't finish this sentence, or maybe I'm not understanding the sentence. Hi, everybody. Yeah, Kelly says that she picks up the cherry smell after swirling. Yeah, that fruit is hidden underneath. And that's what's so excited about these wines is they do blossom in a decanter and with oxygen. And that's the secret to our winemaking style is to allow wines to blossom. They're not just ready for you to drink right away because there is complexity in here. Classic wine regions, and I'll use my studies as an example. So everyone knows, I think that I'm going for my WSET diploma currently. I'm in a program that's broken down into 6 parts where I'm studying wines around the world, and I'm trying to first learn about them theoretically, but also to learn how to blind taste them. And if you've seen the documentary Somm, you know that this process is, I'm sorry, I'm going to share this wine with my mom and sister here before I continue. No decanters. So in my studies, I'm learning to blind taste. And blind tasting is the process of getting something in a glass and not knowing what it is, other than that it's a white, red, rosé, or sparkling wine. From there, in my studies, I should be able to tap into what grape this is, what year it was potentially made, what the winemaking process was like in terms of a very natural process, a very manipulated process. Was it stainless steel? Was it oak used? And then finally, the place that it's from. And the fact that we practice this just tells me that there is a sense of place in wines, and you can actually taste and smell that. So the question I asked when I first started doing these studies is, why are we studying certain wine regions and not others? Of course, wine grapes are grown around the entire world. Most wine grapes are growing in between the 30-degree and 50-degree latitude all around the world. That's a lot of space. And most of those regions are growing crops of one kind or another. And as wine has become extremely popular over the last 100 years, more wine grapes are being planted every day. But we don't learn about wines from every single region. First, because that would be a very, very long program, but also because some have become more recognizable than others. And the goal, of course, is that Texas will become extremely recognizable without knowing what's in the glass. Ultimately, what we would like is for a wine expert to be able to come to this glass not knowing what's in it, smell it, taste it, spend some time with it. Wow, that changed a lot when I just put my nose in the glass. And be able to say, this is potentially this grape, maybe this grape, but I think this is from either Texas, maybe it's from Spain, maybe it's from Australia. Ultimately, I think this smells and tastes like a Texas Sangiovese. And that means there has to be a couple of different things. There has to be consistency of the style of wine that we make. It must be something that's recognizable in order for people around the world to be able to go to a glass and recognize Texas and the grapes from Texas. And then 2 is a set number of grapes that we're using. If we continue using the 79 different grape varieties that are growing in Texas right now, it makes it that much more difficult for people to be able to say, I think this is a Texas wine, but could be any of the, 60 red grape varieties that are growing in Texas. As we go on, as our experimentation continues and slowly starts to narrow down what we are best at, we will have at most 30 grape varieties that define the region. And that is exactly what places like Russian River Valley have done. So the last component that's important for defining a wine region like this, the taste and the style, is market presence. If Texas wine is not everywhere, there's no way that you're going to go into a sommelier program or a WSET program and need to learn about Texas. So ultimately, going to the glass and being able to tell that something is from Texas is going to come with market presence. And this is a different force than just enjoying the wine. We all may enjoy Texas wine, but unless this becomes a recognizable but also desirable and profitable style around the world, we won't need to learn about these wines. We want this to happen. Texas needs to be spread around the world, and I want to hear everyone on here say yes, or I guess see it, because this is fabulous stuff, and it's only going to get better as our grapes are in ground longer and as our winemakers get more experience under their belts. We already know that Bill Blackman is settling this region. He started planting grapes in 1983, so his oldest vineyards are now 30 plus years old. That's a lot of time in ground, and that is value right there. He's also in love with Bordeaux grape varieties, your Cabernet Sauvignon, your Merlot, your Malbec Petit Verdot, and the other one that I didn't mention, Cabernet Franc. Did I mention Cabernet Franc? Yeah, those Bordeaux varieties are doing fantastic in Texas, and they're recognizable. People we know want to buy these. So as soon as these grapes are in ground long enough, as soon as they start to have a particular style that is ultimately Texan and couldn't be anything else, then you'll jump into a wine program and you'll be put a Texas wine in front of you and need to blind taste it. So what I want to talk about today is how Russian River Valley became what it is and where Texas is in that process. Because Russian River Valley, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are both what I consider, or what wine aficionados consider, testable grape varieties, meaning that in a testing situation, you can very much be placed a Russian River Valley Chardonnay or Pinot Noir in front of you, and there is a very recognizable style that you will be tasting, and you should recognize that as a Russian River Valley red or white wine. I want y'all to tell me how the wine is opening up. I haven't been swirling mine at all, so I'm going to see how much it's changed with just sitting in the glass, and I'm going to read some of your questions to see if you had any from that introduction, and then we'll deep dive into the Russian River Valley. Is anyone calling from the Russian River, by the way? I want to know if anybody is on from Russian River. Yeah, still smells super woodsy. We didn't talk about the winemaking process of this. It is 15% new oak. It's a blend of French and Eastern European, and the rest is neutral. Our Alta Loma vineyard has such exceptional fruit that we really do mostly neutral oak with these wines. And that is true of the Syrah as well. So Alta Loma is cool. They're growing now 4 grape varieties, but they started with only 2 and they were both red. They have about 10 acres up in the Texas High Plains, and this is the Burren family and the Floyd family. They started with just Syrah and Sangiovese, what they thought would be exceptional in Texas, or what somebody making wine in Texas already wanted, and they knew the fruit would sell. So they experimented with only those 2 grape varieties, which is super unique because Sangiovese hails from Italy and Syrah hails from the south of France. So to see those growing side by side in a Texas vineyard is actually really, really unique. They have not diversified their crop, which we talked about this in the 3rd episode. If you diversify your crop and you plant 10 different grape varieties, you know that if one of the grape varieties doesn't fare so well in a freeze one year, you have some other ones to back it up, which means that Alta Loma Vineyards has taken a risk. And it has so paid off because their fruit has been so consistent and so rich year to year. They're at the start of their journey and they're already making fantastic fruit. If you have not had the Alta Loma Syrah, you must get your hands on some. Reach out to me if you'd like some, because that Syrah is just so deep and rich and juicy. If you were at the Art of the Blend experience with me at the last release party, you tasted the Alta Loma Syrah. Tell me how amazing that was. I don't know if any of y'all were there with me in that experience. Can't call anybody out. Oh, Alan, thank you for the recommendation. True Card Vineyard, not one that I'm familiar with, but I can be really soon. Awesome. Thanks for the recommendation, guys. I see a lot of y'all have popped recommendations in here for me. Oh, Christopher, I'm so glad that y'all got your wines. Sherry, I agree. Blind tasting is hard. I'm actually really, really bad at it, but slowly getting better. It takes a lot of practice, which means a lot of wine tasting. And this trip it's definitely helped me solidify what Russian River Valley and the Alexander Valley really, really tastes like. And sometimes that's just what it takes. Melanie, I totally agree with you. I'm going to show your comment. Melanie says it's hard to convince a California cab lover to try Texas wines. That is very often true. And this is where blind tasting comes in handy. Um, it takes away all preconceived notions. And I actually recommend blind tasting outside of testing scenarios. If you just ask someone to pour something for you, tell them what you like and ask them to pour it. You then approach the glass with no prejudgment. You can't look at the label and say, oh, that's a Malbec. I didn't like the last Malbec that I tasted, so I probably won't like that. And then you taste it and then you're like, well, it's better than I thought it was, but it's not great. If you had been handed that glass without knowing what it was, and it could have been Cabernet Sauvignon and it could have been Pinot Noir, and you taste it, you may notice something that your mind wasn't letting you taste before. I really highly recommend blind tasting. It's hard if you're drinking by yourself, but it is possible. Pour 2 glasses and switch them around. Oh, Elaine, that's okay. Welcome in. We're drinking the Sangiovese from Alta Loma Vineyards, the 2018 vintage. If you have that, open it and decant it. We decided this was a little bit woodsy and we want the fruit to come out, so we want lots of oxygen in there. Or just open anything and save your Alta Loma Sangiovese for a special occasion. All right. Oh, Kelly said she's had her wine open for about an hour. And it's opening up, it seems. And Tracy, yeah, I was going to call you out to talk about the art of the blend, but you weren't with me the last time. Awesome, awesome. Okay, I'm going to give this a taste, see how it's really changed, and then we'll come back to it since I've been swirling it a little bit more now than I was before. Oh, yeah, that fruit is so rich. I would say that it's changed more on the palate since being in the glass than it has on the nose, and that's not something I usually notice. I think a lot of the times I decant a bottle of wine and then the smell of it changes a lot for me. And then the palate, the tannin gets softer. But with this, the nose is fairly similar. Cherries popping out, yeah. There's some floral notes in there. I know they will release pretty soon. But what really changed about this was the texture. And I think that's really surprising to me. But it is totally what I think of when I think of Alta Loma Vineyards. I think of that rich texture. That's exactly what they give me, and my mouth is just pooling with saliva, so I know there is acidity in this as well. And that's exactly what Sangiovese is known for. It's known for tannin structure. It's known for acidity. It's not necessarily known for a velvety texture, so that is maybe an Alta Loma Vineyard thing. And then it's known for that kind of woodsy tone, which we're already getting. We know that. And also for cherry notes, fig notes, plum notes. It should have a really rich bouquet of fruit. And I think that's what we're going to get in this as it opens up over time. Yeah, isn't decanting just wonderful? Alan, yes, great question. Can I recommend some food pairings? So the first thing I will say when food pairing, if you're not very comfortable with it, is go back to the origin of the grape. The grape became popular because it paired well with the local cuisine, especially when we're talking with European grape varieties, or even a little bit east of Europe too. So Italy, tomato-based cuisine, lots of savory, gamey meats, lots of pasta, lots of basil and fresh herbs, lots of home cooking, and it's usually really, really heavy stuff: pasta, pizza, gnocchi, ragouts, things like that. That's Sangiovese. And the reason probably Sangiovese took off is because that high acidity and high tannin pairs so well with food. This is such a food-friendly thing. And then finally, there's a tomato leaf note that Sangiovese is known for. And as this opens up, I challenge y'all to look for it. Or if you have a tomato at home, go get some tomatoes, smell it, maybe pop one in the glass and see if that does anything for you. We practiced that last week. And see if that helps you tap in. Number 2 on the food pairing is look at where you are now. If you have a high acid, high tannin grape that has a little bit of fruit, a little bit of woodsy tones, and a little bit of tomato leaf, what in Texas would make sense there? We have those gamey meats. I think lots of cheese would do well. We are particularly great at goat cheese. And I think that goat cheese would be really fantastic. Maybe fresh goat cheese with some basil and tomato. Maybe mozzarella would do well as well. That's a really, really creamy cheese that acidity and tannin would totally bond to. And the basil and the tomato leaf would really, really marry together. And then I think of Texas pizzas. What about a barbecue pizza? Anybody think that that would be amazing with this? There's a little bit of tomato sauce. Pizza is an Italian thing. Barbecue is a Texas thing. Marry them together. I could go on and on forever. So I encourage you to think of more food pairings that I didn't talk about, because this is Sangiovese is a food pairing grape. It is Italy's grape. One of Italy's grapes. But this has been a major player in Italy for a long time for a reason. If it didn't mesh with the cuisine, they would kick it right out, because Italy's all about the food. So go crazy with the food. You know, this is your Thanksgiving wine. It's all you need, and it's going to change so readily from dish to dish. And I think it has a lot of range. Kelly is recommending chicken Parmesan. Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Texas barbecue. And I think even barbecue sauce would be pretty righteous with this. I'm sorry for saying righteous. I felt like that was a good word for that moment. Jennifer, great question. Do I recommend aging the Texas Sangiovese? Because you're right. Brunello di Montalcino is a Sangiovese-based Italian wine. I lost myself in the sentence. Sangiovese is the grape in Brunello di Montalcino. Yes, they go through quite an intense aging regimen. So they do a couple years of oak aging before the wine is released. And Brunello di Montalcino is required to legally to be held back years before it's released, because it's just not ready to drink so early. And I would say that Texas Sangiovese is a little bit more delicate than your Brunello di Montalcinos. They are doing that long oak aging regimen because they're trying to soften the tannins. They're trying to allow the structure to come in balance with the rest of the wine, and that comes with age. But Texas Sangiovese, especially from a kind of young vineyard like this, it's much more delicate. So I would give this 5 to 10 years. So if it's delicious right now, of course, drink it right now. But in 5 years, I think this wine will be drinking exceptionally well. And it maybe could go longer than that, but I don't know that I would do that. I think right now, this wine is drinking pretty well, and I really enjoy it. I did have to introduce a lot of oxygen. But as the oxygen has been introduced, I'm really enjoying the floral fruit character that I'm getting from this. And I'm already getting that woodsy tone that will come out more with age. So I like the balance of fruit and earth in this, but I think 8 years, you could push it out there. Maybe if you can save this till 2030, you can be drinking it at the turn of the decade. And that would be pretty cool. Your wine's going to taste even better if you're going from 2029 to 2030. It'd be pretty cool. If anyone from William Chris Vineyards is watching, tell me what you think about the aging length of this wine, if you've thought about this before. Oh, Kelly, we're talking about flowers again. So Kelly joined me for the Mother's Day flowers and wine pairing, where we tried to smell flowers and then smell flowers in the wine. Super, super difficult. And I can't say that I have mastered flowers. I'm cheating because I know what flowers Sangiovese is known for. So I can't say that this is going to be entirely a non-objective answer, but I'm getting some rose hip. I'll get specific. Rose is definitely what Sangiovese is associated with. I'm getting rose hip specifically. And when I talk rose is so general. It's in so many different wines. Is it rose water? Is it rose essential oil? Is it rose scented perfume? Is it a fresh rose? Is it a fresh rose that is a hybrid rose, one of those like cotton candy roses that you get nowadays? Or is it maybe rose hip, rose leaf? Get really specific. Francisco says 8 to 12 years. He's giving this a longer time than I do. And I think that's totally fair. Sangiovese is known for being able to age well, and that is because of the tannin and the acidity. Thank you, Francisco. I really appreciate your input on that. Yeah, rose, I think, is definitely a note on here. And I think it's really, really fresh flowers. There's nothing so potpourri like on here. I don't think it's essential oil, and it's not so delicate to be rose water. I don't know. I always want to say freesia, but what does freesia really smell like? I'm not sure. Oh, gardenia. I've become very familiar with gardenia lately, and I think that's a lovely flower here. So if you're having trouble identifying flowers in your wine, my biggest recommendation is to go with a flower color or floral area. So tropical flowers. If this is tropical flowers, don't get more specific. I don't know the names of tropical flowers except hibiscus, but I don't think this smells like hibiscus. Is it just tropical flowers? Are you in Hawaii? That to me is specific enough. Is it white flowers? You have a whole realm of white flowers. Who cares what the names of those are? People generally know what white flowers are. Is it a yellow flower? Honeysuckle is what I call for yellow flowers all the time because I don't know that I know the name of any other yellow flowers except maybe daisies. Or is it pink flowers? Is it purple flowers? Go for something a little bit more general and just be general and embrace it and don't get more specific because unless you're unless you have a flower shop and you smell them every day, that is one of the most elusive aromas to hold in your memory unless it's a flower that's been present throughout your life. That's very, very tough. All right, guys, let's continue talking about our topic, which is how wine regions come to be. So let's look at the Russian River Valley. There are a couple of reasons why this has gotten to be what it is. Number one is, of course, the terroir. It's a cool climate area influenced by the mountain range on one side, and then you have a big ocean on the other side. This is the Pacific. And then you have the Russian River Valley flowing through it. So you have lots of access to water, but not just water. These water areas and the mountain range seal this in as a cool climate area. So you have cool ocean breezes, you have cooling influence from the Russian River Valley, and all of that is sealed in by the mountain range. And then at the bottom of the mountain range, you have a little gap in the mountains where wind funnels through, and that is called the Petaluma Gap. That is the coolest region. It's not in Russian River Valley, it's just south of it, but I think there should be influence up into Russian River Valley. So we're starting with just a very specific region, and then the soil types range depending on where you are in Russian River Valley. And if that sounds very familiar, that's because that's what the Texas Hill Country is. It's definitely much warmer. You have warm air coming from Mexico flowing through. You have the Gulf as a warming influence on the region. And then you have just pockets of unique soil types, which means that in the Russian River Valley, in Texas Hill Country, if you plant the wrong grape, it just won't necessarily succeed. So besides a unique terroir that makes that region's grapes taste like nothing else and grow like no other grapes around the world, you need grape varieties that make sense. And you need to have winemakers that have planted the grape varieties that make sense, but also you have to have backing from the rest of the region who also agree with you that those grapes do make sense here. So Russian River Valley went through a little bit of an interesting turn. In the 60s and 70s, Zinfandel was a major player. We have some of the oldest Zinfandel vines in the Russian River Valley and around the Russian River Valley. So that was a big deal in California at that time. There are some challenges with Zinfandel in the vineyard. And we had some winemakers coming through, wine growers, they were vineyard workers that thought, hey, it's cooler in here than the rest of California. What if we did something crazy? And we tried out some cool climate grape varieties from like Burgundy or something. Pinot Noir and Chardonnay make a lot of sense climate-wise. I don't know how it's going to go, but let's plant them and see. And they started planting some of the most fantastic Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays that you will ever see. Around the entire world. This was a gamble at the time that paid off, not just because those grapes did well, but because they began to define the region. Other people agreed with the first pioneers who planted Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and said, that makes sense and it tastes delicious. So let's roll with these two grapes and let's plant more of this. So they stood by those two grape varieties. Zinfandel is still prevalent in Russian River Valley and has a very particular flavor profile as well. But Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are the two that made sense and had so much backing that region is defined by those two grapes now. The third thing they needed was something that made that recognized around the world. You can't just have awesome wines and then sell as much wine as you can. You have to have other people around the world recognizing this so that it becomes part of the international market. So I will say that I think this happened in 1976. This was when the Judgment of Paris happened. This was when Stephen, and if you've seen Bottle Shock, tell me about it, how awesome that movie is. Bottle Shock tells the story of the Judgment of Paris. So there was a French he was a British wine salesman of French wines, mostly Bordeaux. This is where Cabernet, Merlot, and Malbec are growing fantastically, Petit Verdot and Cab Franc as well. This guy said, I really want to promote French wines. So what can we do? I'll hold a blind tasting competition with the awesome French wines that I know and love. And then another area of the world that's using the same grapes and couldn't possibly stand a chance. So California submitted some wines. This is from Chateau Montelena and such. They submitted Chardonnays and Cabernets, Cabernet Sauvignons, and they competed against the French Bordeaux that were of the same grapes. So in that blind tasting, it was all French judges. It was decidedly going to be a French win, and California took the gold. Their wines were top placed in that tasting, so much so, and it was so surprising that they actually did a redo of the Judgment of Paris to see if the same thing happened, because, the French judges were like, oh, well, there must have been something wrong with the French wines. Maybe they weren't showing well, or maybe there was something in the air. Someone was wearing too much perfume and it really messed up my senses. How could I have said that the California wine was better than the French wine? They redid this blind tasting and California took gold once again. So at that time, California was put on the map internationally. French, European interest totally increased at that point. And then you saw Bordeaux and Burgundian winemakers coming over to California to see what was happening. Why did those wines take gold? Not only because of awesome winemaking practices, not only because the ripe grapes were growing there, but also because the terroir is so unique. Those grapes couldn't possibly be grown anywhere else in the world. So even though Russian River Valley is not working with Cabernet Sauvignon on a large scale, California was put on the map, and therefore Russian River Valley stood a chance to promote its Burgundian style wines. So the international market attention was caught, and now Russian River Valley wines are sold all over the world. The last thing that you need is a signature style. And this is where experimentation comes in, because lots of people passed through California, Russian River Valley, and said, I think open top fermentation makes a lot of sense. I think wild yeast makes a lot of sense for these wines. I think lots of oak will work well with these wines. So there was a huge, very exciting time of just experimentation with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and Zinfandel, where pioneering winemakers got to come in and put their stamp on this region. And it's those stamps that those pioneers put on Russian River Valley that define the flavor of it now. And that is new oak usage. You get warm, spicy flavors, malolactic fermentation for Chardonnays. That makes a lot of sense for the grapes coming out of that region. Wild yeast fermentation was something that was experimented heavily by Helen Turley, who was a pioneer of the region. And those practices, they make very different wines, but all of those different styles are now associated with Russian River Valley. And largely, that is what's practiced there. And of course, you'll always go into Russian River Valley and you'll find, around the entire world, and you'll find someone doing something experimental and modern and different. But for the most part, that is what that area became recognized for. So all of those components together is why, as a sommelier and as someone who's studying for my WSET diploma, I will very likely be poured a Russian River Valley Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and be expected to recognize it, no matter what producer it's from. So now that we've covered how wine regions become, and it's a different story for everywhere else around the world. It's different because the Judgment of Paris didn't happen to the rest of the world. That was specifically California. It's different instances everywhere. And Texas will be no different. Texas is a very different story than California. And after a couple more sips of wine, we are going to talk about where Texas is in this journey and what we have going for us, why we could eventually become a testable wine style in a testing situation. I think I had a lot of questions, so I'm going to see what y'all had to say. Yeah, Jennifer says that Russian River Valley selection was also defined by the Napa Valley land being so expensive to play with. Yeah, Cabernet brings in a lot of money, and you are not wrong there. Cabernet Sauvignon is one of the most valuable, if not the most valuable grape around the world. It has a ton of not just street cred, but just there are so many fine Cabernets being made around the world that it's become extremely expensive. And since Napa Valley is prime land for Cabernet Sauvignon, some of the best in the world, it has become very expensive land. But at the time that that area was being settled, basically before 1976, the land was not so expensive. And one of the wineries I went to today, I was told that land in the late 1800s was probably $200. And now, you know, a Napa Valley block can go for $1.5 million. That has been largely due to Cabernet Sauvignon. And yes, I feel like Russian River Valley it benefited from its proximity to Napa. And the land in the Russian River Valley is expensive, but not nearly as expensive. No matter how good your Chardonnay is, it will probably never sell for the same price as some of the highest priced Cabernets in the world. And that is just recognizability. That is consumerism. It's what the consumer wants and will pay for. It's not just about the quality of the wine, which means you can get great bargains out there. And right now, Texas is one of them. So shameless plug, if you're not a member with William Chris Vineyards, now's the time to join. Or join with a friend. Bottle Shock is an awesome movie, Tracy. I love it. I need to rewatch it soon. And I see that a lot of y'all have watched it as well. Melanie and Laura. That it's such a cute movie. It's like a little bit of history, a little bit of like romance story, a little bit of comedy. It's a really cool way to learn about the Judgment of Paris. Awesome. And I see a lot of y'all are familiar with the Judgment of Paris. So that's great. This is what defines a wine region. Without the Judgment of Paris, where do you think California would be? Would they be in the same place? I don't know. I don't know that they could have been. Maybe somebody else would have recognized. But I mean, that blind tasting has movies and books. I mean, people are still talking about it. And that was only 50 years ago, which means that's how fast a wine region can be defined in less than 50 years. All right, let's see where the Sangiovese is at. Oh, that's lovely. It's so much more floral than it started. The woodsy notes are still floating around in there. There's a really strong cinnamon spice character to this. And I think that is partially from the oak, but there's only 15% new oak on this, which also means that the Sangiovese has some of that spice note. It can't all be coming from the oak, which means our style of low intervention winemaking has encouraged the spice notes of the grape to show forth. And that's really, really lovely. Still rich and creamy. If anything, the decanting of this wine, the contact with the oxygen has just made the palate so balanced. It's definitely a food wine, but it's one that I would be happy to drink by itself. I think it doesn't really need food. I don't know if y'all agree with me. All right, so where is Texas? First, we talk about terroir. Do we have unique terroir? If you have been watching Summer Sippin, you know we do. We covered geography in the first episode and the 8 wine growing regions called AVAs in Texas. What they're defined by, it's totally different. We have some very high, over 5,000 feet elevation areas in West Texas. We have the Texas High Plains defined by that raised plateau, strong winds, low disease pressure. We have the Texas Hill Country defined by humidity and warm Mexican winds coming up, varying levels of altitude. So many different soil types and pockets of soil, including limestone and gravel and granite, caliche soil, some areas with sand, some areas with clay, some areas with flint in the soil. That is diversity that I don't think you could find anywhere else. On top of that, and this is something that's very important and that I want y'all to spread the word on, is it's not just the diversity and the uniqueness of the terroir being different from one place to the other. Texas has some of the oldest soil sites in the US. And I think what Chris Brundrett told me was that one of our areas, Bell Mountain, has the second oldest soil in all of the US. And that is in Bell Mountain. It's 2 billion year old soil. I don't even know what's in there. I don't know how that affects the grapes, but I know that it does. Soil that old has such probably concentration of minerality, so many different soil types. Ultimately, that was volcanic soil. I mean, it was back when the continent was still shifting, taking form, which of course it is still today, but that is defined by ancient activity. And then in some of the Texas Hill Country, you have 2 million year old soil, not quite as old as 2 billion, but still really freaking old. That is something that you can't find elsewhere, which means that we have a terroir. This isn't even with talking about the heat in Texas. The heat in Texas and that wind and altitude combination that you must have in order to be successful with grapes, that will make our grapes taste like none others, because grapes just can't grow the same way elsewhere that they would in Texas. 2, the grape varieties growing here. We have 79 different grape varieties, and that's the number in 2019, so it's probably different today, but somewhere in the 80s. We are working with white and red varieties, mostly red, and we have gone from pop grape varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay to your warm and hot climate grape varieties. We have committed already to grapes that make sense in Texas, that are also making sense in the southern parts of Italy, Spain, the southern parts of France. Those are also the grapes that are doing well in Australia and the northern part of South Africa, some even doing well in Argentina. So we've committed to grapes that make sense for us. And you know what these are. They are your Mourvedre, Tannat, and Sangiovese. Those are William Chris's big three. They are Aglianico, Tannat. I said Tannat. Roussan, Viognier, Tempranillo, Carignan. There's Grenache, Syrah, Roussan, Marsanne. There's Cinsault. There's so many grape varieties that we have the pleasure to work with right now. But the common thing is that they are not afraid of sun. The vine training techniques that wine growers can use can vary. What we found is that shading the grapes from some of the sun or giving indirect sunlight by managing the canopy, which is your green leafiness on top of the grapes, that has helped us succeed with these grape varieties. And that's what we've already committed to. So over time, and we've discussed this, I've said this before, we will narrow that down. There will be some grapes that just shine above the rest, and that will leave some other grapes out. We'll decide that, maybe, and I'm not going to call out any grape varieties. And if you ask me, I won't call any out because there are a lot of producers still working with different grape varieties, and I want them all to be supported. But what will happen gradually over time is that some grape varieties they will be delicious, but they won't be as delicious as your Mourvedres, as your Tannats, as your Sangioveses, and as the grapes that, we're really putting a lot of force behind, but also we're seeing other people plant. And we talked about this with Mourvedre. Mourvedre was heavily increased in plantings in the last 5 years. And that's a huge shock because most people can't even pronounce Mourvedre. The fact that vineyard managers are planting more of it means that they know that it will sell because it's going to be delicious. Well, first, it grows well. Second, winemakers make delicious wine out of it. But third, consumers are willing to buy it. Otherwise, the winemakers wouldn't want it. So these are the grapes that we are already starting to define. We have a long way to go, definitely. We need to shave off some of these grape varieties and really commit to a certain combination of grapes. But that will happen over time. It's just the way life works. You stop planting what is less valuable than other things. And that's how you get wine regions like Burgundy with only two grape varieties, three or four grape varieties. And that's what they've committed to. So we're still in the beginning of our journey, but we're getting there very fast. Three for Texas is an interesting history. And I've said this before, wine grapes in Texas were planted 100 years before they were ever in California. These were the mission grape varieties. These were the American grape varieties that were native to Texas. So we've been growing grapes for a long time, but those mission grape varieties are not what the market latches onto. And it's just not the wine grape variety that is on the market right now on a large scale. It is in some places, but it's harder to find than your European grape species. That's the Vitis vinifera, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So in the 1700s, 1800s, we had these mission grape varieties planted. We were making wine and eating the grapes, but during Prohibition, a large amount of those grapes were pulled up. It didn't make sense to continue growing wine grapes when you could plant other things that could continue to make money through Prohibition. So we saw the planting of peanuts, cotton, alfalfa, squash, watermelon. Agriculture has been a big deal in Texas for a longer time than grape varieties. So all of that was planted during Prohibition, and the mission grape varieties were largely pulled up. I think about 95% of them were completely pulled up. So we lost that time during Prohibition, and Prohibition maybe hit Texas a little bit longer and harder than the rest of the U.S. We continued to have dry counties, especially in the Texas High Plains area, for a very long time after Prohibition lifted. But either way, Prohibition lifted and European grape species were planted. And this was on a small scale at the time. We wanted to replant wine grapes, of course, so that we could have not only sacramental wine, but also wine was popular at that time. California was on the map already. And so you plant wine grapes, so you can make wine for your local peeps. So that happened. The European species was planted finally, and we planted what was popular: Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and just went with it and experimented. Over time, we saw those grape varieties sit back a little bit and other grape varieties come in as we learned more about the land. And that's why we have so many hot climate grape varieties coming there. Now, there were a couple other things that happened in our history that have really defined the region. But before I tell you what they are, I need to have another sip of wine. And I think y'all are reminding me that I haven't taken a sip of wine in a while, which we know is my fatal flaw. Not enough wine, obviously. Jennifer, great question. Does William Chris Vineyards have any other vineyards in Bell Mountain besides the Granite Hill? And no, I don't think we do at the time. But we are always... Bell Mountain is very, very close to High Texas. It's really, really not that far. So we may, but I am not privy to that information because Bill and Chris are always going around the state of Texas and finding more vineyards to work with, finding more excellent fruit. And it's all just changing of relationships. It's whether the grapes are available, whether we've decided to buy land there and plant the grapes ourselves. And it's, who we've worked with before and who we want to continue working with. I don't know if Francisco, maybe if we have any vineyards that I don't know of that we're working with, but right now I don't think we do. But that doesn't mean we won't next year or the next or the next. Yeah, Karen, I think that's a really good point. Alan. Oh, good question. Does William Chris have other sources of Trebbiano grapes? There's a lot of Trebbiano being planted right now. So yes, absolutely. I don't know exactly where from. We just acquired Hoover Valley Vineyards, and I am almost positive they have Trebbiano growing in their vineyards. So I think we may see some Hoover Valley Trebbiano coming out, which is going to be really, really cool. I know that we have gotten some Marsanne from them, and I know they have a lot of different grape varieties planted. So hopefully Trebbiano is in that mix. And I think they have not shied away from Italian grape varieties. So I'm thinking it will be in there. Granite Hill has Trebbiano, of course. but I'm not sure what any others would be. But again, I'm not privy to all the information. There are a lot of William Chris wines that I don't know exist, and then Chris tells me about them, and I'm like, hey, that's a cool thing that I didn't know about, such as the beauty of William Chris. Melissa, what wine is for next week? So next week we will be tasting the Grenache Rosé from La Pradera Vineyards. And then the week after that, we'll be doing the Tannat from High Estate, the 2017 vintage, which is going to be stellar. And the last of this 4-week period is the Marsanne from, it's on the tip of my tongue and I can't remember the name, One Way Vineyards, I think is where it's from. So next week is that Grenache La Pradera Rosé. Which took the place of the Cinsault Rosé on the tasting menu for now. We still do have more of that Cinsault 2020 Rosé. If you loved it and you want more of it, we do still have it, but it won't last forever. So the Grenache La Pradera Rosé is what we're pouring now in our tasting room. We do have a case special for it. I think it's $250 for 12 bottles, which is about 2 or 3 bottles for free, and you get shipping included. So if you like that wine for next week, just keep it in the back of your mind that I can ship you a discounted case of that rosé. Awesome. I'm so glad y'all love Trebbiano. Trebbiano is another one that's so up and coming in Texas. We've seen beautiful expressions of it, and I challenge you to drink more William Chris Trebbiano, especially if it's coming from different vineyard sites, but also anyone who's making Trebbiano is probably making some seriously good wine in Texas. How is harvest going? Any rain getting in the way? Not that I know of. Last time I talked to Chris and Bill, they said the harvest was going really well. Everything's ripening at different points right now. And so they're kind of, in order to do things the right way, the William Chris way, it takes a lot of running around and checking and making sure the grapes are perfectly ripe at the time that they are harvested. You know, it's not just, hey, we have time this day, let's go harvest this vineyard up here. It's, hey, I have time this day, let me go up and check and see where these grapes are at so that I can decide to harvest them right now, or, you know, we check back in a couple of days. So it's, the rain has really not damaged anything. And it would just dilute the grapes just a little bit, but our team is really good at recognizing when the rain is coming and harvesting before that happens. Awesome. Sherry, I'm so excited you're coming out this weekend for Punch Downs. Awesome. Karen, what's your question? Oh, Karen, that's a great question. And we'll talk more about this. I'm not sure, but yeah, why not? I think that would be super fun. So I'll reach out to you, or you reach out to me at email me at kelseykr@williamchriswines.com. I think that could be really cool and fun. How long does harvest take? Kelly, great question. With all the vineyards William Chris Vineyards has or works with, how long does harvest take? So Blanc de Bois, we talked about a couple weeks ago. It ripens very, very early because it's a hybrid grape. So it was harvested at the end of July. The beginning of Blanc de Bois harvest was at the end of July, and it goes all the way to sometimes mid to late September. And that's pretty late for us. But harvest will be a couple months. Usually it's 2 full months of harvesting, and those are 70-hour work weeks for our production and harvest team at the least. So actually our event coordinator put together a spreadsheet for those who can help feed the production team and the harvesting team, because they are working their butts off right now. So we're helping to feed them in our spare time. Tracy, yes, the Grenache Rosé is in the current 4-pack. So that's series 9 through 12. We are on episode 9 right now, by the way. So next week will be 10, and that's that Grenache Rosé. So it'll be all in that pack together. I saw on the website today, it doesn't have a picture. Just know that if you're buying the series 9 through 12, you're getting the right one. If you're buying the one that doesn't have a picture of the 4 wines, you're buying the right one. I think it's $155 for a pack right now of awesome wines, including this one that we're drinking today, but also the Chnot from High Estate, which has been so good that we've pulled up a lot of the grapes on site and are planting more Chnot. It just makes sense. And that's that process of experimenting with 5 or 6 different grape varieties, and all of them are good, but you don't just want to settle for good. You want to settle for great. And the Tannat was what was great. So sacrifices are made, and we plant what just makes so much sense that we can't turn away from it. But if you've had the Tannat from High Estate before, you know how true that is. All right, so I wanted to take another sip of wine, but also to talk about what else defined Texas history. So we talked about prohibition. We talked about vitis vinifera species being planted. We talked about grapes slowly making their way to being hot climate grape varieties. But there were a couple other things that happened that truly defined Texas and have changed the game, which is why the Texas Hill Country is what it is now, which is why we're growing so many grapes in Texas High Plains, which is why we're talking about a Texas wine industry at all. We are educating because of a couple things that happened. So in 2001, there was a Senate bill that was passed that said that dry counties could not only produce wine grapes, but they could sell those grapes to be made into wine and actually make wine in the dry counties. Before that, that could not happen. You could not use the dry counties for what they're used for now. And that is that lasting effect of prohibition. And that's why it hit Texas so hard. So in the Texas High Plains, where now the vast majority of our grapes are coming from, we were not able to use that to its full extent, and we were after that point. Then in 2003, Senate Bill 877 passed, and that was the Senate bill that allowed for Texas to ship wine to out-of-state consumers, which means that before 2003, or maybe it was 2005, but in those couple of years, we were not shipping our wine to out-of-state consumers, which means maybe there wasn't a demand for that, which means that everything was restricted to local consumptions in dry counties, no less. We had, maybe New Mexico was wanting grapes from us at that point, but there were legal restrictions around what we could do with those grapes and what we could do with the finished wine. So at that time, we were able to ship to out-of-state consumers, meaning that the word of Texas wine could actually spread at that point. At that same time, that legislation allowed for other states to ship wine to Texas. So maybe at that time, the Texas palate started to change because we got more wine from around the world coming into Texas, into dry counties. So this was like the reawakening of Texas was when this bill passed. That was now, 16, a little over years ago. We've had 16 years of, no restriction. At that time, we were able to use grapes from across the U.S. Or the rest of the world in order to make our wines. And now, the big thing that's changed is the legislation has gotten even stricter on Texas wine labels. So 16 years later, in 2021, we have finally put legislation that says that if you have Texas on a label, where is the Texas on the label? If you have Texas on a label, 85% of your grapes must come from Texas because Texas grapes are awesome. 15% can come from outside of Texas. If you have a vineyard, a county, or an AVA on a label, 100% of your grapes must come from Texas. So we've gone from Senate Bill 877, just allowing us to ship and receive wine over state lines, to making sure that Texas grapes are going into this bottle. This type of legislation does not pass unless we know that we can be successful and produce high quality wines with only Texas grapes. But not only that, it means that there is a reward for it. It's all politics. Nothing happens unless there is a reward for what you do. So that means in the last, 20, 30, 40 years, everything that has led up to this has said that Texas is producing such quality stuff that 100% Texas grapes will sell and won't hurt us to the point that it damages Texas. We can only benefit from having Texas grapes in this bottle. And if you're drinking this wine with me or any Texas wine, you know that that's true because you can taste it. This is the type of stuff that defines a region. This is why Texas is not just on the path to become a fine wine region. We are on the path. We are on an upward climb, and it's going very, very fast. We have a ton of momentum right now. And the biggest thing that can hurt Texas, I think, and this is just my personal opinion, is a loss of momentum. It is people not coming into Texas to taste our wine anymore because there's another exciting wine region that pops up, or because there's something like a pandemic that pops up and keeps people from coming here. There are, influences outside of wine industry that will affect the Texas wine industry. And there's no way we can predict what's going to happen. So I think what we have to do needs to happen really fast, and we are primed and set up for that. So as much as you can, share the William Chris story, talk about the wines, Lost Draw Cellars as well, your favorite 100% local wine producers. Talk about them to your friends. Also talk about that legislation that just passed, because that's important and it is industry defining. So we're not quite to the point where Russian River Valley is. We haven't had a Judgment of Paris. We've definitely won awards. We have award-winning vineyards in Texas, award-winning winemakers. We've won awards for some of our artist blend labels. I mean, we're out there. We're putting our names out there to competitions, the rodeos that happen, those wine judging competitions, but also France, Europe. There are competitions happening everywhere that we are entering wines into. And this is where it's happening. All we need is people to recognize what is happening in Texas and that it's consistent and that it's honest. And this legislation is going to be a big part of what allows the rest of the world to take us seriously. So I think the next step for us is market presence. It is expensive to grow grapes in Texas. We have a ton of things working against us. We have a very, very challenging environment that we have to grow grapes in. Land is becoming more expensive every single day. So the price of the wine has to be right. People have to be willing to pay for, a $50 Sangiovese from Alta Loma Vineyards, knowing that it's expensive to grow grapes in Texas, but it is so worth it. All of those are factors that go into market presence. And I have not studied marketing or economics or any of that. It's a huge mystery to me. So those market influences, I can't even predict, but there's going to be something that catches Texas wine and allows it to float into the market. And we just don't know what it's going to be yet. I'm going to see if you had any questions, but we're coming to the end of our time, which means that if you have questions, ask them. If I said anything that was confusing, I will totally answer that question, not only today, but maybe next week if I don't get to all of the questions. So let me know what you think about everything that I said today. This is a lot of speculation. This is a lot of just looking at factors around the world and trying to predict the unpredictable. Awesome, Jennifer. Great question. In a blind tasting, what characteristics could help you identify a Texas wine, red or white? That is a great question. And there's several tiers to this answer. The first one would be, what does the climate do in Texas to the wine? It's mega hot here. So maybe you're going to get riper quality of fruit. So Kelly said there was cherry in this wine, but she didn't get more specific. Can anyone get more specific with cherry? Is it tart cherry that you go to the grocery store and you bought a bag of cherries that looked good and then you brought them home and you took a bite of one and you were like, oh, that's so tart, it's not quite ripe. That is a cool climate factor in wine. Or maybe you bought some cherries. They were, some of them were red, some of them were black in color. You took it home. The black ones were very, very soft and you tasted it and it was overripe. It wasn't pleasant because it didn't have that snap and pop. That is ripe cherry. That is a warm climate grape quality feature in the wine. And then you have a spectrum in there of, just ripe. And maybe that's your warm climate with a little bit of cooling influence. But Texas is hot. Or it's warm and breezy up in the Texas high plains. So you're going to get ripe fruit all the way up to super big, bold, jammy fruit. And with that ripe fruit and jamminess is going to come higher alcohol, because as your heat and your sun hit the grapes, it thickens the skin and you get higher tannins, but it also builds up the sugar, which means your acidity is falling, your sugar is building up. A lot of times in Texas, we're picking grapes at the time where the sugar has gone up to here and the acidity has fallen to here. So you get really ripe, juicy grapes with a little bit lower acidity. Now, this is very general because in a grape like Sangiovese starts with, the sugar here and the acid here. The acid's super, super high in Sangiovese. So there's a little bit of a different balance. You get preserved high acidity and ripe fruit and higher alcohol at the same time. And then you have environmental influences. So if you've ever talked to Chris Brundrett and did not hear him say desert sage, you didn't have a very long conversation with him, because desert sage is such a big influence in Texas that he is seen because sage is planted around Texas. That influences the actual flavor of the grapes. Because we talked about this. It's the chemistry of how grapes pull nutrients from the ground. The grapes in Texas are pulling the same nutrients in the ground that the sage is pulling from the ground. So that affects the similarities of those two. In Texas, you also have things like cedar growing. And I think cedar is a big part of Texas, which is why if you are getting an intense, spicy or woodsy note off of this, it's probably partially from new oak, but that new oak that we use is only 10 to 15%. So that the spice and the woodsy notes are coming from something in Texas or in the soil. And I think it is the cedar influence, maybe the oak tree influence. Those are all small, subtle notes that you really have to define a region. And certainly the Texas Hill Country is different than the High Plains, is different than Davis Mountains and Texoma and the rest of everything. And then Bell Mountain inside of the Texas Hill Country is even more specific. And there are a lot of factors. So that's a really good question that has a very long answer. And that's kind of what we're building on here. Everything we've talked about is why your wines are tasting like Texas. And the final factor, we've already seen that Texas has complexity and quality, intensity, and the ability to age. So all of those are factors that you will smell and taste in Texas wines. There's a sense of quality and raw expression that Texas has that I think will carry on into Texas becoming a recognizable wine region by taste. I think that raw expression is maybe a signature that will stick with Texas. That sounds very Texan, doesn't it? It's, a raw expression, raw wine in the glass. It's just honest Texas grown, locally grown wine from Texas farmers. And I think that's what this wine tastes like, and all of our Texas wines. If anybody else has anything to add to that, what you taste in Texas wines that is so Texan that it couldn't happen anywhere else, please feel free to throw it in the comments and let me know. Cedarwood, I think, is the big one for me. Desert Sage is it for Chris. And it kind of depends on you as well. What is familiar to you? I think Merved smells like barbecue, and that's either a Merved thing or a Texas thing, or they, play off of each other. But, if you smell barbecue in a wine, why wouldn't it be a Texas wine? Awesome. All right. So we are at the end of our time today. If you have any other questions, throw them in the comments. I felt like this was a really short episode and something that we could talk about forever. We only touched on 2 wine regions today, but keep in mind how many wine regions there are around the world. Some of them ancient wine regions that lost grapes for a while and are starting to make wine again. I mean, just imagine what kind of journey they've had. And please keep in mind that it's also so driven by the consumer. There are fads. If we never planted the pop grape varieties, we may not have continued with wine. That's something that largely defines what a wine region does. And I've said this before, the grapes that we're planting in Texas now, like Merved and Sagrantino and Tannat, are not largely recognizable around the world. So it takes a little bit of faith on your part to buy our wines, even if you don't recognize what the label is saying to you, to buy those wines anyway. The world is going to have to be very open-minded in order to embrace Texas wines and the grapes that we're starting to work with. And it's a gamble. It is a huge gamble to see whether it catches on. But if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. And the way to do that is 100% Texas grapes, low intervention winemaking, and working with the right grape varieties, whether they are recognizable or not. So in conclusion, spread the word. This is the time to invite someone to join Summer Sippin. Buy them a pack. Hopefully it'll get to you in time so that they'll have a Sangiovese on the back burner to enjoy another time, or maybe to rewatch this episode recorded, which we're recording all of these so you can go back and watch. Or they can just jump right in with a Grenache Rosé. I am so excited to talk to y'all next week from San Antonio again. But for now, I am going to continue my Russian River wine journey and check out to see if y'all had any other questions before I wrap up and continue drinking the Sangiovese with my mom and sister here. I hope y'all like the Airbnb I'm staying in. If anyone is in Russian River Valley, shameless plug to the Carriage House. This place is absolutely amazing. And I want to thank Camille for opening this home to us. It's beautiful. I hope everyone noticed that I brought my book from home as some familiar background love. Did anyone notice that? Awesome. Thanks, guys, very much for joining me today. We had a smaller group today. I hope more people are on vacation like I am. And yeah, Daddy, I'm glad you said that. Yes, Texas wine is awesome. California wine is also awesome. Drink both. Don't choose one or the other. Just drink both. I'm not telling anyone to not drink California wine because I'm out here doing it. So just make sure you have both in your cellar. And if you see that your California supply is kind of creeping up and your Texas supply is dwindling, I can help you get more. Just let me know before that happens so that we can keep the balance at a nice Texas, California level. We're, Texas, California level. No, Jennifer, I didn't bring the lamp too. This was actually in the Airbnb and I made sure that it was in the shot because it's super cool. It's a cognac. This is called a Jeroboam. This is a 3-liter bottle of cognac wine from 1878. I don't know if this is real or not, but I thought it was really cool and I wanted to make sure it was in the shots. This house is full of cool stuff like that. There are like big marble grapes everywhere and it's really cool. Thanks guys so much. All right, I'm hopping off. I'm gonna have an amazing time in California and I will see y'all next week for a talk about winemaking, what the winemaking process is like. And if y'all are doing the grape punch, you know a little bit about that. So come with some good winemaking knowledge and I'll help fill in any of the holes that y'all have and talk about what William Chris does that's special to their wines and different than everybody else. Invite more people to join, share this on your page, and I'm going to go drink some more wine. Bye, guys. Thanks for joining. Bye, Tracy.